I moved into that house when I was in my last year of high school. It was somewhere on the outskirts of a quiet American town, close enough to traffic that you could hear engines at a distance, but far enough that nights felt hollow. The house looked ordinary from the street, with a narrow driveway and old siding that had faded under too much sun. Yet everything behind the front door carried a weight that didn't belong to something built by people. Inside, the first thing I noticed was the corridor. Thin, long, pulled tight between two rows of rooms like the spine of something that had been stretched beyond its natural length. Every door along it seemed slightly out of alignment, as if the house had settled in ways the foundation didn't approve of. The air pressed down more than it moved, heavy with the smell of dust that never lifted no matter how much we cleaned. Light never really traveled down that hallway. It entered from the windows near the living room. It touched the front door, but once it reached the corridor, it just thinned out and stopped. Even with the ceiling lights on, there were places that looked shaded. Not dim, but actively resisting illumination. When you walked there, you could feel temperature drop without a draft. The cold didn't move. It waited. It stayed in place, like something with boundaries. The floors vibrated in a way I didn't mention to anyone. It wasn't enough to rattle anything, not enough to hear. But when I walked barefoot, I could feel a faint tremor beneath the boards, a barely there shift, like something adjusting its posture 1 second before my foot landed. I dismissed it as an old house issue at first, but it was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Houses groan, pipes knock, wood expands. But this felt like something aware of weight. My friend Evan came over a few weeks after we moved in. He wasn't the type to scare easily. He joked too loudly, walked too fast, ate too much, and had a way of filling space just by being in it. Nothing supernatural or strange ever came up in our conversations. So when I opened the door that afternoon and he stepped inside, I wasn't expecting anything. He entered behind me and immediately lurched backward. Not a trip, not a stumble, a full-body recoil, like his shoulder had hit something solid, though nothing was there. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm, and for a second I felt his weight pull through me, as if the house itself had pushed him back out. I didn't say anything, and he didn't explain. He just straightened, breathed once through his teeth, and stepped inside again. Slower this time, but his eyes were already fixed on the hallway. His body stayed angled away from it, like he was trying not to look directly but couldn't stop himself from doing so. He stood still long enough for me to feel the air shift. It thickened, not in temperature but in density, carrying the subtle scent of old wood soaked with moisture. The walls looked darker than usual, and the corridor seemed narrower with him standing there, as if it had drawn closer by an inch or two. He didn't speak until we started walking toward the living room. His footsteps were uneven, like he was stepping around something that wasn't on the floor. Every few seconds he glanced sideways into one of the rooms, or over my shoulder at nothing I could see. At one point halfway down the hall, he stopped moving entirely. His breathing changed, not faster, but deeper, like he was bracing himself for something. I turned to ask what he was doing, but he only shook his head once, short and sharp, as if answering a question I hadn't asked. We made it to my room at the end of the corridor. I walked in first. Evan stayed at the doorway. He didn't cross the threshold until I turned back and gestured to him. Even then, he stepped inside like someone stepping onto an unfamiliar surface, expecting it to give way. He stayed close to the hallway, back-angled toward the wall, never fully facing the inside of the room. I asked him what was wrong. He said nothing. Not, "I'm fine," not, "It's nothing." Just nothing. Lips pressed, jaw tight. eyes scanning the carpet near the closet like he was tracking something I couldn't see. When we hung out, he kept shifting his attention toward the doorway. He wasn't really listening. Every time the house settled or a car drove by or the floor creaked under its own weight, his shoulders tensed in the same pattern, tightening, relaxing, tightening again. Not fear, anticipation. When he left that evening, he looked relieved the second he stepped back onto the porch, like the outside air allowed something in his chest to move again. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the house had shifted. Not physically. More like the attention of something unseen had turned toward us for the first time. The corridor felt longer, the walls colder, the silence at the far end thicker. I kept hearing faint pressure changes, tiny thumps against the walls, like a hand brushing lightly at intervals. Not footsteps, not scratching, just pressure, moving in short pulses from one room to another. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just wrong. And when the lights dimmed for a second, barely a second, I felt the same jolt in my body that Evan had felt at the doorway, like something inside the house had shifted its weight again and wanted us to know it. By morning, the air still held that density. Something had noticed us, and it hadn't lost interest. In the early hours after that first night, things inside the house began shifting in ways that didn't match any routine I was used to. I woke before sunrise and walked down the hallway to the bathroom. The floorboards under my feet felt colder than usual, not the kind of cold that comes from a winter draft, but a pocketed chill, concentrated in tight sections as if something had stood there only moments before. The bathroom was at the end of a short dressing area attached to my parents' room. The dressing area formed a narrow passage with a low ceiling and a line of built-in cabinets on the left. The air inside it always held a faint smell of varnish and fabric dust. When the door swung shut behind me, it did so quietly. But the closing felt delayed, like the weight of the door caught on something before settling into the frame. While washing my hands, I heard a soft impact from the cabinet shelf. Dull, brief, not loud enough to be something falling to the floor. More like something tapping wood from the inside. I stayed still and listened again. No repeat. Only the quiet hum of the vent. When I opened the bathroom door, the dressing area felt narrower than when I entered. The overhead light flickered once. The air smelled faintly metallic, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. I stepped through, and that was when I noticed the first object displacement. On the cabinet shelf closest to the door, two small stuffed penguins, blue and pink, sat facing forward. They belonged to my younger sibling. I didn't touch them, didn't move them, but that morning the blue one had shifted several inches to the right. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't turned over or knocked down. It had simply changed position, one short slide along the shelf. Enough to notice. Too precise to be an accident. I put it back where it belonged and went on with the morning. Later that day, Evan came over again. He didn't step fully into the hallway. He stayed near the front room, eyes scanning the corridor the same way as before. When he finally walked toward the living room, he passed the cabinet, glanced at the shelf, and stopped mid-step. His hand rose halfway, then hesitated. He leaned forward slightly, examining the toys without touching them. I asked what he was looking at, but he only made a short motion with his hand, something between a warning and a dismissal, signaling not to speak. He stayed silent, but his body angled in a way that suggested he was listening for something I couldn't hear. When we moved deeper into the house, he walked with the same uneven rhythm, avoiding specific sections of the hallway floor as though stepping around invisible outlines. That evening, while a few other friends were visiting, The house felt more active than usual. Shoes piled near the entryway, voices scattered between rooms, faint music from the living room TV. The noise should have covered every small sound, yet I kept catching faint taps against the walls, once behind the hallway, once near the storage room door. Not loud, barely there, but patterned. At one point I passed the cabinet again. The pink penguin was closer to the edge than it had been an hour earlier. No one claimed to have touched it. No one had reason to. The positioning wasn't playful or careless, just moved. Later that night, one of my friends complained that the main bathroom was occupied too long. So Evan and I headed toward the bathroom inside my parents' room instead. He followed close behind, too close, like he didn't want me farther than arm's reach. When we passed the storage room across from the bedroom doorway, he suddenly jerked his head toward it, eyes fixed on the dark gap at the bottom of the door. His breath pulled in sharply. He didn't speak, but his fingers tapped the back of my shoulder once, quick, firm, telling me to keep moving. Inside the bedroom, the dressing area felt different. The air was too still, like the entire space was holding itself in suspension. I pushed the bathroom door open, and Evan grabbed the edge before it closed, keeping it from shutting all the way. When I asked why, he didn't answer. He simply tilted his head to the side, listening. That was when I heard it again. A faint clatter on the cabinet shelf outside the bathroom. Not a fall, not a drop. More like something being set down, something small. The sound lasted less than a second, but Evan's reaction was immediate. His grip tightened on the door. His shoulders locked. The air felt heavier, dense enough to notice against my skin. He whispered, "Don't move," barely audible. The first words he'd spoken in minutes. We waited. The house gave no further sound. When we stepped out, I glanced at the cabinet. The blue penguin had changed places with the pink one. Not fallen, not disturbed, just switched. Both toys were angled toward the dressing area now, slightly turned inward, as if positioned intentionally. No human had been there. The floor carried no new footprints in the thin layer of dust near the cabinet legs. I didn't say anything. Evan didn't either. He simply motioned once toward the hallway, same gesture as before, quiet and urgent. By the time the house settled again, the night had gone long, and the friends who stayed over fell asleep in the living room. The corridor was silent, but occasionally the boards shifted under no weight. A tiny rhythm. A soft sequence. 2 steps. Pause. Another 2. Light, like small feet on wood, or something close to that. By morning, the air no longer held the metallic scent, but the shelf arrangement hadn't returned to its original order. The toys remained angled inward, as if they hadn't been moved all night. When the front door opened and the others left, Evan stayed behind. He didn't sit. He didn't relax. He only said he needed a moment to talk, his voice quieter than usual, eyes fixed on the far end of the hallway as if watching something I couldn't see. And when he finally spoke, he told me something he hadn't said the night before. Evan didn't say anything inside the house. He just pointed once toward the front door and waited for me to follow. The others had already left, and the living room was still messy with blankets and empty cups. The air felt unmoved, like the house was holding its breath. Evan walked ahead, but he didn't look at anything, didn't look down the corridor, didn't look at the dressing area, didn't look toward the storage room door that he had reacted to the night before. He stepped onto the porch first. Only when both of us were outside and the door was closed did he finally exhale. He told me he didn't want to talk anywhere near the house, so we walked down the path toward the main gate at the edge of the property. It wasn't far, just a straight stretch past a patch of brittle grass and an old fence. But Evan kept glancing back every few steps, checking the windows even though the curtains were drawn. At the gate, he stopped walking. He didn't sit. He didn't lean on anything. He stood still, shoulders squared toward the house, eyes focused on the front door as if waiting to confirm it stayed closed. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard before. He said the house wasn't empty when we entered the previous day, not in the way people mean when they talk about energy or atmosphere. He meant literally, not empty. He said the first time he stepped inside, right after crossing the threshold, he saw a bare foot beside the shoe cabinet. Not a shoe, not a shadow, a foot. Skin pale, toes slightly curled under, heel resting flat on the floor, positioned like someone had been standing there for a long time without shifting weight. But he didn't see the whole person at once. He saw the foot, then the ankle, then the outline of a leg, and finally the shape of a woman standing by the cabinet. Her hair hung over her face, too long, too tangled, covering the features completely. She didn't move. She didn't look up. But Evan said her posture made it clear she wasn't passing through or leaning. She was waiting. He thought she would turn when she noticed movement, but she didn't react at all. Her head remained down, her hair masking everything above the jawline. He said it felt like she wasn't ignoring him. She simply hadn't decided to acknowledge him yet. He didn't want to alert her that he'd seen her. So when I asked him what was wrong yesterday, his "I'm fine" wasn't fear. It was calculation. He didn't want to provoke something he didn't understand. Then he told me something I hadn't expected. The entrance light, motion sensor, placed just above the door, hadn't been flickering because of old wiring. He said she had been standing under it, and the sensor wasn't detecting us. It was detecting her. Every time the light blinked on and off at night, he said, the shape under it didn't move. The light responded to a presence that remained perfectly still. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice, not out of fear, but like he wanted the words kept separate from the house behind us. He said that when we all walked in yesterday, and he saw the woman, she didn't shift, blink, or turn. But she did one thing. She inhaled. A small lift of the shoulders, a tiny expansion of the ribs. That was all. He said the house's temperature dropped an instant later. I didn't interrupt him. He continued, the words more deliberate, like he was recounting something he was forcing himself to remember clearly. He said the toys in the cabinet, the two small penguins, weren't just shifting because of some random disturbance. He said something small was attached to one of them, something not shaped like a child or an animal, just small. He said he saw it twice, not in full form, but through movement, a blur running along the floor, darting behind furniture, climbing the cabinet in a single motion too fast to track. Then the toys would tilt or change direction, as if nudged by invisible hands. He didn't try to describe what it looked like. He only said its height reached midway up the shelf, and that it never appeared unless the air in the hallway got unusually still. That same pocketed stillness I'd felt by the bathroom. I asked him why he hadn't said anything sooner. He pointed back at the house again. No explanation, just a short gesture, the same one he used inside when he wanted me to stay quiet. He said there were more things in the house than the woman and the small presence by the cabinet. He said the house was layered, like different parts were occupied by different things, none of them reacting to each other, only reacting to movement from us. Then he told me the part that stayed with him the most. During the night, while everyone slept in the living room, he woke up once. He didn't hear a noise. He didn't feel anything touch him. He woke because the sensor light at the entrance blinked on, then off. then on again. He said he stayed still and listened. After the second flicker, he heard the unmistakable sound of bare feet stepping on hardwood, soft but present, pacing slowly near the front door, not walking deeper into the house, not approaching the living room, just pacing. Evan didn't get up. He didn't even open his eyes fully. He listened until the footsteps stopped and the house sank back into silence. He said that when he looked toward the hallway later, the shadows near the cabinet seemed denser than they had earlier, like someone had stood in front of the shelf long enough to block the faint ambient light and leave an imprint. He finished talking and rested his hands on the cold metal rail beside the gate. Birds were starting to move in the trees nearby, but he still stared at the house, the windows shut behind drawn curtains. He said the woman at the entrance wasn't wandering. She stayed near the door because that was where she belonged, as if she was trapped in the narrowest part of the house but waiting for the right moment to move again. He didn't embellish. He didn't speculate. He only told me what he saw and what he heard. And he said the small thing near the cabinet had been watching us, not the woman. When he stopped talking, the wind shifted through the gate posts, carrying a faint rattle of something metallic. Evan straightened, looked once more toward the house, then told me that what he described wasn't everything. And as we walked back toward the front door, he said quietly, "There's something else you need to know." Evan didn't look at me when he said there was something else. He only tilted his head toward the upper floor window, the one that belonged to the master bedroom. The curtains were drawn, but the light from outside pressed faintly through the fabric, turning the window into a flat gray rectangle. He watched it the way someone watches a door they know will eventually open. We stepped back inside. The air in the hallway hadn't changed. It still felt divided, as if the temperature shifted every few feet, pockets of cold settling in the corners while a warm draft moved through the center. Evan didn't step past the threshold at first. He looked at the ceiling above the entrance, then slowly lifted his gaze toward the far end of the corridor that led to the master bedroom. He asked if I'd ever noticed the space between the wardrobe and the ceiling. I told him it was too narrow for storage and too dusty for anything useful. He said it wasn't empty. Evan didn't walk toward the room. He just stood in the hallway and described what he had seen during the night, speaking evenly, as if recounting details from a security report. He said that when the entrance light flickered the second time, he opened his eyes only enough to see the outline of the bedroom doorway. The hall was dark, but the ambient glow from the city outside cast a faint sheen across the ceiling, and in that thin layer of dim light, he saw movement. Not on the floor, not by the door, but high up by the seam where the ceiling met the tall wardrobe. He described it in fragments, as though the memory came to him in sections, a weight shifting, a hand, too thin, resting flat against the ceiling, fingers splayed unnaturally wide, pressing so tightly the joints stood out as ridges under the skin, then another hand, then a slow turn of the torso, as if the body attached to the arms was rotating into the room, settling its weight onto the ceiling without a sound. Evan said it moved like something that had done it many times before, not climbing, not crawling in any way he recognized, more like pivoting, turning its body the same way animals roll their shoulders to reorient themselves. He didn't see the face, only the hair sliding downward in a long tangled curtain, strands sticking together like they'd been wet and left to dry in clumps. The hair brushed the top of the wardrobe before rising again as the figure continued to rotate upside down, planting its palms onto the ceiling and beginning a slow, circular motion. He said the rotation was purposeful, Clockwise at first, then a pause, then counterclockwise, as if completing a cycle it repeated nightly. He said the sound came afterward, not immediately. A delay of several seconds, enough time for him to register each hand's position against the ceiling. Then, the noise started. A dragging scrape. Not the scratch of a nail, not the thud of a fist. He said it sounded like hardened fingertips, long ones, catching on the textured paint of the ceiling. A brittle, dragging click. Slow, then faster, then slow again, in the same rotational pattern. I didn't interrupt him. He spoke without looking away from the bedroom door. He said the figure never descended into the room. It stayed between the ceiling and the wardrobe, drifting through that narrow space, circling above the same square of floor. Every rotation left faint taps against the ceiling, as if its nails were too long to lift completely off the surface. He said that at one point, the figure stopped moving entirely. Its head hung downward. The hair reached nearly to the floor. Then the body pulled itself back into the gap above the wardrobe, folding into the darkness so smoothly he couldn't tell when it stopped being visible. After that, the house was silent again except for the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Evan told me he didn't sleep after seeing that. He stayed awake until morning, listening for movement above the ceiling. He said at one point he heard the scrape again, briefer this time, like a single drag of a fingernail across plaster. Then nothing. He said he didn't mention it earlier because he didn't want the others to panic while they were sleeping only a few feet away from the hallway. But he also said something else. He had heard that dragging noise before, not during the sleepover, not the night before. He had heard it once when I had shown him the house weeks earlier, when we walked through the rooms after my family first moved in. Back then, he thought it might have been a branch brushing the roof. But the sound had come from inside the house, not above it. He didn't frame it as a warning. He didn't suggest moving or leaving. He simply said he thought my parents had probably heard the same thing without realizing what they were listening to. Then he listed what had happened to them. He said the dragging sound on the ceiling reminded him of the day my mother sprained her ankle on the stairs. How she had mentioned hearing something the night before, something like pressure shifting in the ceiling. Then he mentioned my father's injury, the one caused by a mishandled procedure at the clinic. He didn't say it was connected. He said only that the timing aligned with nights when the sensor light flickered repeatedly. He didn't build a conclusion around it. He listed events in order, like matching entries in a logbook. He said the figure above the wardrobe moved more on nights when footsteps paced by the entrance. He said the small thing near the cabinet scurried more often on days when the ceiling produced that dragging sound. He said the woman at the door inhaled only when someone walked down the corridor. 3 different places, 3 different patterns, none of them overlapping, but all of them active. Evan rested his hand against the wall by the bedroom doorway. He didn't enter. He just kept his palm there, as if feeling for vibration. He said the thing above the wardrobe didn't interact with the woman at the entrance. It didn't look toward the cabinet. It didn't acknowledge the rest of the house. It moved only when someone walked beneath it. He lowered his hand and stepped back. The air in the hallway shifted slightly, the stillness returning to the edges of the walls. He said the figure wasn't wandering. It wasn't lost. It had a defined boundary, the space above the wardrobe, extending outward in a narrow ring on the ceiling. Then he said something else, short, clipped, like he was choosing each word carefully. He said the thing above the bedroom reacted most strongly when the door was closed. He didn't elaborate. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said it as a fact, then looked once more toward the ceiling. We didn't move further into the room. We didn't try the light. We didn't approach the wardrobe. We just stood there in the hallway, the air unmoving, the corridor lights dim, the house quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Evan stepped back first. He turned toward the living room without saying anything else, but before he walked away, he looked at me once and added one final detail in the same flat tone. He said that whatever lived above the wardrobe didn't leave that spot. Not once. Not even when it rotated along the ceiling. Not even when it paused mid-movement. It always returned to the same exact place. As if that narrow gap was the center of something I hadn't noticed yet. He didn't explain what he meant by center. He didn't need to, because the moment he said it, I remembered every night the sensor light flashed without reason, every faint scrape I couldn't identify, every shift in air pressure that passed above the hallway. He looked back down the corridor, the doorway open, the ceiling still. Then he said nothing more. But before we ever left that house, one thing never stopped. I documented the last weeks in that house the same way I recorded everything else, with dates, times, and the locations of the noises. The master bedroom ceiling continued its pattern even when the rest of the house stayed still. The rotation never changed speed. The dragging noise never shifted direction. Every movement repeated as if it followed a route fixed long before we moved in. Evan said the house wasn't forming anything new. It was replaying something that had already happened. Not memory, not haunting, just residue. A place holding on to whatever had imprinted itself into its structure. My father kept the habit of leaving a small lamp on near the entrance, a leftover routine from the previous owner. We learned later that the man who lived there before us followed strict religious rituals, keeping candles lit in specific corners of the home. After he moved out, the corners he kept illuminated became the darkest places in the house. The air felt heavier there, as if the light had been holding something back. My younger siblings started waking up at night, not screaming, just frozen, eyes wide open, as if watching someone move across the room. They described footsteps at the foot of their bed and a figure standing by the dresser, leaning forward without bending its knees. Some nights they saw hair dangling from the ceiling, hanging over the place where the wardrobe met the wall. They stopped sleeping in their room after that. No one questioned it. Before we left the house, Evan returned once more to check the hallway. He didn't enter the master bedroom. He didn't look for the figure above the wardrobe. He said it wouldn't matter. Whatever was there would stay until the building itself changed. We moved out at the end of that month. The new place felt normal, but small traces lingered. A faint dragging sound in my memory whenever the lights flickered. A pressure shift in rooms with high ceilings. The sense of something adjusting itself in corners with too much shadow. I didn't try to interpret it. I didn't try to reconcile what happened. Some houses keep things, some houses repeat them. And even now, every time I pass that building,